Welcome to the Vision by Protiviti interview. I'm Joe Kornik, editor-in-chief of Vision by Protiviti, where we look into the future to examine the big topics that will impact businesses worldwide over the next decade and beyond. Today, I'm excited to speak with David Howard, an associate professor at the University of Oxford and co-director of the Global Center on Healthcare and Urbanization at Kellogg College, Oxford. David was one of three members of our Oxford team that helped Vision by Protiviti conduct the survey, analyze the results, and co-author the Executive Outlook on the Future of Work 2030 and Beyond research report. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Joe. Thanks very much for inviting me. I look forward to talking about the survey, and I think there's some really exciting results and findings coming out.
Yeah, we're excited about it too, David. So, thanks to you and your team for helping us put it together. This is a pretty good sized survey of 250 C-level executives, worldwide, about work sort of a decade from now. What would you say is the big takeaway? What's the big headline from these results?
Well, I think in terms of the survey, of the 250 business leaders from around the world, 86% believed that the type of work that their employees will be doing in 2030 will be different from it is today. So that's a massive transformation in terms of really not only how we manage and lead the workforce, but also how the workforce responds to changing climates. I think the other aspect was that technology clearly is a key, and 80% of business leaders recognise that technology would be transformative in terms of the way their business is operated in 10 years' time. And but 88% recognise that AI, artificial intelligence, will be a key transformative agent within their business context. I think the other aspect of that is while technology is increasingly important, and rapidly so. We only need to look at the last 2 years in terms of pandemic, how we are now sort of conversing online together. But one of the key aspects, given this transformation of the workplace, is that 86% of all business leaders recognise that they might find a shortage in terms of skilled labour to engage in their business in 10 years' time. So overall, the results show the importance of new and emerging technologies, but also the importance of having a skilled labour force that can engage with and make these technologies profitable for their businesses.
Yeah, really, really interesting. A lot of great takeaways, even initially. I know the survey talked a lot about the things you mentioned, certainly technology and skilled workforce, labor shortages, et cetera. I know the questions kind of covered all aspects, right? So technology, talent, culture, collaboration, jobs, and even sort of offices of the future. So when you dig down into those specific areas, I mean, you've already sort of talked about technology a little bit, but what are some of the thoughts around some of those other key areas the survey covered?
Well, I think the survey was undertaken at an interesting time. It's in January, February 2022, this year, and it's a time when many countries and economies are emerging out of a pandemic. A lot of the work on the future of work, a lot of research, I should say, on the future of work was undertaken before the pandemic. And our lives have changed, our work regimes, the way we manage people has changed. And I think what we asked our business leaders to think about was the work they were doing today, but also how it would change in 10 years and beyond. And on their response was that 78% of their company's employees were working in the office before the COVID pandemic. And they're envisioning that actually in 10 years' time, 70% will actually be working some hybrid format between home or communal workspaces, but not in the office. So that hybrid format has been, as we know, has been a massive transformation. But most business leaders recognize that this will remain, and in 10 years' time, they will be working with a workforce that is 70% will be hybrid.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know that it's a global survey, right? So I know there's a lot of sort of back and forth when we talk about the different geographies and how the perceptions are different from business leaders in North America versus Europe or Asia Pacific. So I think there were some pretty interesting differences among those leaders in those three different geos. What stood out to you from a geographic perspective?
Well, I think there's a recognition across the board that technology is changing business. I mean, that was one of the clear takeaways from the survey. But in terms of regional differences, There are some quite stark anomalies, really. So, as we see, if we look at the respondents from North America, 70%, or 78%, sorry, 78% of business leaders in North America thought that quantum computing would have no impact, would have no relevance to their business in 2030. Now, then, if we look at those respondents in Europe and Asia, over 50% thought that quantum computing would not only have an impact, but it would be a significantly transformative impact in terms of their business networks and their business operations. So there seems to be a quite a stark regional difference, say, in recognition of the importance of quantum computing.
Yeah, that's really interesting and really surprising.
And Joe, can I also add another stark difference? I think, which is there's a we probably think that our the standard working week, the 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, let's call it that, is going to change. You know, as we're here now, online, etc. That somehow the way we live our daily lives and the way we work through our daily lives will change. Well, actually, the survey says, again, there's a regional disparity, that in North America, 78% of the business leaders actually said the standard working week would remain quite prevalent. That actually we would be thinking about 5 days a week, 40 hours, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, etc. But when we look at the respondents, the business leaders in the Asia Pacific region, they're actually saying only 35% of the business leaders in Asia Pacific see the standard working week as really having any relevance in 10 years' time. So there seems to be a lot more, I don't know, say a flexibility, but a very different outlook in terms of how those business leaders in North America and Asia Pacific view what they might consider a standard working week.
Yeah, very interesting. A couple of surprises in there. It sounds like. Um, there's always a couple of findings in all in these surveys, right, that sort of keep us scratching our heads and seem counterintuitive. And I think that maybe you just highlighted a few of them. Um, can you share any others? Were there any other moments where you thought this doesn't quite make sense, or let me flip this around and figure out why we're seeing this result, perhaps, and it might feel like we shouldn't be seeing that result?
Well, I think that at the outset we recognised that 86% of business leaders thought that staff retention would be an issue in 10 years' time. But then we also have the notion that 84% of business leaders believe that their employers will be more loyal, that staff loyalty will be increased in 10 years' time. So there's an interesting dilemma there between, I mean, maybe you could say that if maybe business leaders are talking about their own company, they're thinking, well, my company's, you know, good and my workers are loyal. But there seems to be a bit of a quandary there. And I think that increases if you look at in terms of the responses from North American business leaders, at 95% express concern about staff retention, but also 95% believe that the loyalty to their company would increase in 10 years' time. So there's a dilemma there, and the explanation, I don't know. I don't know. I think in some ways, the positive explanation is that businesses are know they're going to be put a lot of effort, and we should say a lot of money and time and energy into retraining their staff, making sure their staff are upskilled and able to respond to the technological challenges. And maybe on that basis, they're saying, well, actually, we're going to put a lot of effort into training our workforce, and therefore we are expecting them to remain loyal to our company, our brand, etc.
One thing that I thought was pretty interesting, David, was, we talked a lot about AI and all of the technology that will be so integral over the next decade. And typically, a lot of people think that AI could be a job killer, or could be could decrease the number of jobs. But there was a finding in the survey that indicated that most companies think their workforces will actually be larger 10 years down the road, even though AI and technology and emerging technologies will be such a big part of it. Do you see that as a disconnect, or do you think that makes complete sense?
I think you bring in AI to make your company more efficient, maybe to be more productive. So maybe there's an optimism there that actually we can use technology to expand. And the notion was, as you said, automation would reduce the number of people working on specific jobs, and that will be the case. But also, if you look at the trends in terms of upskilling, retraining, getting a workforce with greater capacity, then you could say, well, actually, yes, if we engage with AI, if we have the skilled workforce, if we're investing in our employees, then this not only will increase profit and revenue and our company success, but will allow us to expand the business per se. So there is no, in terms of the business leader's response, there is that quite a positive correlation between AI and the growth of their workforce, and one would say then the growth of the success of the business. So I think you're totally right. It's a very optimistic outlook, although some of the anomalies, there are a few surprises in there, which I think are worth considering. And I think particularly individual business leaders might want to say, well, where am I now? Because we're responding to changes from the last couple of years, but those ahead of the game are thinking about the next decade or beyond, because we can see a massive change in the way not only we work, but how our employees work, and really what the goals are going to be for businesses in the future.
Right. And David, I think that's one of the big differentiators, right, around this particular survey that we've done together is that we're looking a decade out. There's a lot of surveys about future of work that's a lot more, near focus on the next, 6 months or a year or even 2 years. But we're asking them to look a lot further out. So last question for me. When you look at the survey as a whole and you sort of dig into how these global C-level executives are looking at, workforces, workplaces, in 2030 and beyond, what do you think the key takeaways are for senior executives? Like overall, would you say it feels like they're prepared, or do you think there's work to be done? And if so, what should they be doing to get themselves ready for the future of work a decade out?
Well, I think the responses are optimistic, but I think they're grounded in reality. I mean, there was a report by the World Bank in 2019, just on the cusp of the pandemic, before we had heard the word COVID-19. And that World Bank report looked at the changing nature of work. And those trends are ongoing. They've been intensified during COVID, but the two key trends were the influence of technology and automation, but also the importance of upskilling, retraining a workforce. And I think those still hold true. They're the things that forward-looking business leaders are thinking about. And I think the survey does suggest that yes, as we said, over 80% recognize the need to adapt to changing technologies, but also over 80% recognize that they might face a labor shortage in terms of skilled labor shortage unless they invest energy, time, and focus in retraining their labour force. And then we might say that might be the reason why employee engagement and loyalty to as an employee is perceived to be will be increasing 10 years time. So it's an interesting it's an interesting quandary. It's an interesting context. But again, if you're going to be ahead and out there, you that's where you need to be thinking. Not only next decade, but a decade beyond that decade.
Well, David, thank you so much for your insights. You can get those insights and a lot more in the full report that's out right now, Protiviti-Oxford report. David, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. It's a great report and an enjoyable read.
And thank you for watching the Vision by Protiviti interview. I'm Joe Kornik. We'll see you next time.